Thank you very much for joining me for the 9th year of the Voice of Job Seekers podcast. This is Mark, and I loved every single moment throughout the years offering you job and career advice. Some of you have been with me for many years now, and I appreciate it, and I thank you very much. We've had some great conversations, and most of the shows for the fall have already been recorded, so I want to be sure that you had that you're preparing for what you're about to hear. Got some really great stuff with people who are releasing books, doing some new things in job search. Job search is definitely is a changing landscape that's constant and fluid at this particular time. So I want to give you some different views of it, not just the how to grind, get a job search advice, but also some longitude career advice perhaps that you can use for a long time. And also I'm going to add some business and leadership aspect to it as well, like I haven't had to in the past, or haven't wanted to in the past, although early on I did, but in the past few years I haven't. So let me give you an idea of what the different interviews that you're going to hear coming up. Scott Beeson is a multi-time guest. He's going to be on a show and his book about bringing the whole person to the workplace that you want to listen out for. In fact, you heard that last week if you've been listening to the podcast. And by the way, have you subscribed yet? If you haven't, good time to. There's so many places: Apple, Spotify, Audible. Don't forget that. And Amazon also are places where you can subscribe to the podcast. Jack Kelly, you probably know him. He doesn't have a book, but he's my co-host on Job Seeker Nation. It's a live stream show that we stream to YouTube, LinkedIn, Twitter, and Facebook every Wednesday at 1 p.m. Eastern. So go find that and go follow us. And we really get down to what the job search landscape is looking at from a macro point of view. Beverly Jones is joining me. Find Happy at Work is a book that she has just written. It's just been released recently, so you want to listen to that interview. She's also the host of Jazz at Work podcast on NPR, and I've been a 3-time guest of that podcast, so I wanted to help her promote her book, Find Happy at Work. Mark Babbitt is on. He's also a multi-time guest. He comes on every couple of years, and we talk about various aspects of job search, interviewing, etc. His book, along with Chris Edmonds, is called Good Comes First. Is the correct name of the book. I'm sorry. Had a little lapse there. But you will enjoy that book. I highly recommend it. And his interview is going to be coming up very soon. Antonio Boyd is Executive Vice President of the Future of School. You want to be a part of that. Sharon Smith Akinsanya wrote a book called Colorful, and I've been helping her promote that on the live stream, and also have written some articles along with her. And one of these days I'll tell you the story about how we made Forbes, just because of my recommendation of the book. Luke Whitburn is a longtime listener and friend, and he's a staffing executive, and he's led a number of teams in the staffing world. He's going to give advice about how to network from the top down. He's been able to find jobs without necessarily submitting a resume first. Thought that this would be something interesting to hear. And I have a friend of mine named Niato Benson-Chill. You've heard him a couple of times in the past couple of years. He's got a special episode coming up, and I'm going to keep that a little bit on the down low. But I want you to be able to hear that special interview along with him. This year, in addition to the podcast, and also the video, a lot of these interviews you can find on video on my YouTube channel. Just look me up, Mark Anthony Dyson. Al, for the first time, will provide the transcript to those interviews and those featured conversations. Not necessarily the clips or the samples I give you, but those people I mentioned, they will have transcripts associated with it. So I want you to catch that. Also, I'll feature some clips of one or both of my live stream shows on an episode. Job Seeker Nation, of course, is the Wednesday show. The Friday show is the Modern Job Search Checklist with Damian Burkle. And both shows, we have guests on our panel. So you'll get to hear some of that advice. Very practical, very useful perspectives as well. So let's talk a little bit about this episode. And by the way, each of these episodes are probably going to be an hour or more. Maybe a couple of times they'll lean towards an hour and a half. Last week's episode with Scott Beeson was the shortest one of the season. So there's so much I want to be able to give you, and I want you to have every bit of it. I don't feel insulted if you skip around. Really, I don't. Because I know the time is precious, and not everybody wants to listen to an hour podcast, although you'll be missing out if you don't listen the whole hour. So anyway, let's talk about this episode with Jack Kelly, my friend, compliance recruiter, entrepreneur, CEO of Recruiter.io, and Forbes Senior Careers Contributor. He talks a lot about the future of work, and especially when it comes to job search. And he had a little series going for a while about the future of job search. I really do want you to follow him on LinkedIn to see his lives on the future of work. Should he continue again, I think he stopped for a little bit because he got busy. And he's doing it big. Here's a little bit of what we talk about in this discussion, how job search has vastly changed from the last 2 years, and even at the point of 2 weeks ago. Job search advice and strategy is changing at a quick rate. We talk about how the Great Resignation has become an empowering movement across the world, not just here in the United States. How mass mandates will change where people will work and how people will work. The future of job search is remote, he says. And he makes a very clear case why. I also love his point and quote here. It says the defining characteristic of a company, and they really articulate to their workforce what's happening in a very empathetic, compassionate, and intelligent way, Not demanding, not stern, but really just talking to people like they're human beings and sharing. In essence, he's saying those are the companies that if they can do that, they'll win the day. So I hope you join us in that. A couple other notes I want to bring, and I promise that the intros to the future shows won't be as long. As I promised, there'll be a transcript every Thursday available. So if you want to grab that, you can. Since I've been on other podcasts and other video and radio shows, I'll also sprinkle a little of those interviews throughout the year and throughout the shows. Last year you heard a lot of those at the beginning of the show. This year I'll be a little bit more creative. I've been recording some bonus content as well that you can find on a YouTube channel you can't find anywhere else. I'll provide some clips of that, and then you can go see or hear the entire conversation. They have to do more with business and leadership than with job search and career, although most of the time it's kind of lumped into the same, right? In the meantime, here's a clip from the Modern Job Search Checklist. About a week ago, Matt Hannah Morgan and I had a discussion about the hidden job market, and you guys know Hannah. She's been on the show a number of times throughout the years. Our views may surprise some of you. We'll see. I'd like to know what you think, and you just let me know. You can always send me an email at mark@thevoiceofjobseekers.com, or you could text me at 708-365-9822. That's always available to you, or just email me or contact me on LinkedIn. Those are fine in the meantime. I would love to know your thoughts and would love to know what you're thinking. You guys take care. Hopefully, you enjoyed this show. Let's go on to talk about one of the other hot buttons.
I
I'm
knew
glad
this was
you're here.
coming.
And Lord knows I've interrupted a lot of chats over the past year, particularly as we talked about the hidden job market. Uh, Myth or real thing? Are you ready to dig in?
Yes, 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 yes.
So, your thoughts?
I'm an old school kind of person.
Mhm.
Here is I do not believe it was initiated to market or spin services. What I think it did was to get, and what I hope it does is get people to think about, oh, is there a market other than what I see on the job board or in the newspapers?
Mhm.
That's what I want. Like there are jobs that you may not see, you may not be aware of. And that is what we mean by the hidden job market. It needs a new term. I get it. I would never use that to scare people, but I want to educate people because you know as well as I do, Mark, that
Mhm.
most job seekers think, oh, job search, let me log into Indeed and go see what's available.
Right.
If that is your only method of job search, there are lots of other jobs that aren't on Indeed that you are not seeing.
Yeah.
That's what that means.
I'm going to take you down a road that's never been down before. I'm sorry. That
I'm
was
ready.
yeah, bittersweet symphony. That's my quote from that song. But but I'm going to take you to another song. It's called "At This Moment." You remember from Billy Bira back in the early part of the '80s. The
Hum a few
song was
bars for me, my friend.
well at a later time. I'm
Okay.
making a point right now, but the song was written in 1981. It became popular in 1985. The song was already out there. So, is there a hidden song market?
Interesting point.
Let's take
So what do
movies.
we
There are
call that
movies.
market then? What do we call a song that we don't
Well,
know about?
do we have to call it a market? And even the word market is suggesting that there are people putting these hidden jobs out there. That is, we're going to hide this job in this
Yes.
place. I
Right,
mean,
right.
think about it, right? We have if a song is released on Spotify, does that mean that because it's not on iTunes, it's a hidden job because it's only on Spotify?
It's a really good
You
point.
understand what you understand my point? The
I
same
got
with the
it. It's a
movie.
great
We can
analogy.
we
I
can
love
make
it.
that we can make that argument for movies. If a movie has come out a few years before and doesn't get into the theaters until a couple of years later, is there a hidden movie market now?
Good
I mean,
point. Love that.
it showed in New York and L.A., but it didn't show in Tampa and Chicago and Boston. Now, is that
Right.
a hidden movie market? I mean, to me, there isn't a logic to that. What is good for, I think, has happened is for the career professional who says, I'll help you navigate the
Tap
hidden job
into.
market,
Yeah.
and it's like, oh, he can help me find those jobs that are not out right out there. When really you could do the same search that Career Pro can do.
Yes.
Uh, I'm going to read a couple of comments here from Damien, and let's see. Uh, he says in his group, Professionals Transition, by the way, for those who don't know, his group has helped more than 10,000 job seekers find jobs since 1992, in case you don't know. He says, professional in transition member who thought he lost offer because the final step was a drug test. The third party sent him a link and went into spam. He simply deleted it.
Oh.
He followed up 3 days later asking about the link. The HR rep explained, and let's see, I guess, let's see, I'm trying to see the rest of the comment here. Explained the mysterious third party member and then said you have 3 hours to get the drug test and his offer would be rescinded. She said she would plead for a second chance. It was a crisis call. He was 100% convinced that he was out of a job. Bottom line, he called the hiring manager this morning and he got the job. and that's great in the sense that that worked out. But having said that, that goes back to some of that communication aspect that we talked about, where you sent the link, you didn't prepare the person, saying that link might go into your junk folder, because I'm sure they're not that person was not the first person that they experienced that with,
Right.
so they
Right.
didn't get that warning. So therefore, you're gonna then put, luckily that person got the job, but can you imagine just stress that person went under?
Well, and honestly, that should not have been the problem of the job seeker, that they weren't going to meet the deadline, and
Exactly.
that shouldn't have been their problem. That's something the
Exactly.
company should own. Don't make the candidate feel bad about that.
Yes. Yes.
That's crazy.
That's crazy.
Companies are so high and mighty.
Yep. Yep.
So
Yeah, they are.
I love your analogy about the hidden job market. There is no hidden job market, and we all can agree to that, right? It
Right.
is like that song that you never heard, or that
Yeah.
movie you never saw.
Right. Yeah. It was always out there. And if you looked hard enough, is what we kind of ask job seekers to take the extra step two, three, or four times, then then is something's hidden from what you can't see. And I get that. But there's a lot of ways employers put jobs out there. They don't always go to Indeed or their website.
And that's what job seekers need to know, Mark,
Hmm.
right? So the average job seeker does not know this. The average job seeker does not know that there's a big price difference between posting a job on LinkedIn and posting a job on Indeed, right? And that not every job gets posted on LinkedIn. A
Right.
lot of right, and some people don't post a job on LinkedIn, but they may share it as a post in their status update. So they're just different ways companies will advertise their
Hmm.
openings.
Yes. And to your point, is that I worked with a company, a big company. It wasn't all that small. It was 800 employees, but it wasn't all that big. They chose for some of the departments not to advertise for those jobs through the newspapers and things at that particular time in those particular years, like everybody did. At that time, Career Builder and Monster were
Were the big
the
ones.
were the were
And
the
it
big
was
ones,
expensive.
and very expensive. They chose to advertise through either word of mouth or through the free papers that were available. And so a lot of the free papers, and some of them in Chicago, they can have as much a circulation as 10,000 people. And so, but it was some of them were thick papers, some of them were thin papers, but albeit that they chose to use that method.
Yeah,
And and that doesn't mean that the jobs were hidden. That means they chose not to broadcast it on a large space.
right.
So
Absolutely.
big companies, or companies that can afford it, don't want to spend the money for that particular department for whatever reason that they have. And in fact, the department could have big parties every year, but they spend little on advertising for the
Right.
job.
But in
So,
this, so one of the things, and I know you probably have talked about this before too, is though, one of the reasons why I want job seekers to create this sort of target list of companies they're interested in is so they can go
mhm,
to their company's career website, because most of them will have one, so they can sign up for the alerts or whatever and just monitor their career website, because that might be the only place the company will make a job announcement.
yes,
And they
yes,
do that
absolutely,
on purpose, because the company's logic is, if somebody really wants to work for us, then they'll see this on our website because
yeah.
they already know about us.
Yes, yeah, absolutely. Scott Bennett is a friend of mine who's an author and psychotherapist. Wrote a resume book back in the day. He joined us from Facebook. He says that employers' failure to adequately check lab vendors is an important clue about the culture of the organization. That is right on the money, isn't it? I mean, it really does say a lot about how employers need to also understand their own funnel and distribution of information, and also how they relate to employees as well.
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
Yep. So I think that was a great comment. And Simone comes back in, and she says she interviewed for a posted job with the recruiter. During the interview, job was filled already. Took another job through the same recruiter. 1 week later, same job with first interview was posted again. I called the recruiter to inquire. They said they forgot to remove. We've heard that before. And
Happens
I said,
all the time.
yes, yes, it
Now,
does.
that's not really hidden, that's just stupidity.
And we've seen the opposite as well, where the employer forgot there was a job description out there they never hired. They just keep it out there.
All
People
the
keep
time.
applying, yeah, and it happens a lot. And that's an anomaly again. If you've got 6 or 7 other interviews,
Doesn't matter
you
as
could,
much.
it won't
Right.
matter.
And so people say, they come back to me a lot. I have the same, like the client will come to me and say, I applied for this job. They screened me, but they didn't want to move me forward. But now I see the job is posted again. Should I reapply? I'm like, it's your call. I mean, they're probably not going to talk to you, but you never know.
Yeah.
Companies are fishing. And if you don't have somebody that you've spoken to inside the company, then you'll never have the intel that you need to understand what's really going on there. Like,
Mhm.
there could be 1,000 reasons why the job was left up or the job was put back up or whatever. We don't know. We can't assume the job is still available or that the person didn't. We don't know.
Yeah, right. We completely agree. And last comment comes from Damien, and then we'll wrap it up. Says, my old boss posted one comment, not job position, in LinkedIn, encouraging them to contact her directly for a global senior vice president. And that's common. That's common,
Yeah.
depending, and that's the way that really C-suite works. The C-suite works in such a way is that
Talking.
you're not going to see the job on Indeed. You're going to talk through the different forums, or maybe word of mouth, or through the network that you're in, or through the industry organization,
Or even a retained recruiter, an
or
executive
retained
recruiter.
many times. So yes. And so I'm going to bring on my friend Jack Kelly. I think everybody's bringing them whole selves to work and to whatever they're doing, whether they like it or not. I think one of the things that we can talk about a little bit is how job search is going to look in the future and how it's going to be different for everybody, because now people have to consider not just where they're working with, but who they're working for. How is a big deal. But in your view, I know you've written a lot about and have been talking a lot about on your channels about what things are going to look like. So we only have a half hour here, and you and I could talk for hours, which we do anyway.
I like how
But
your preference is. We only have a half hour, so keep
yes,
it somewhat brief if you can.
well, I think one of the bridges to this discussion
Yeah.
is how people are going to attack their job search and what people are going to consider. So, in your view, what is going to be the difference between 2 years ago and now, as far as people going forward and looking at going into a job search, whether they've been present or they haven't been present in this particular environment?
See, it's interesting. Like we're saying 2 years. I'm looking this way, is that if we had this conversation 3 weeks ago, my answers would be different than it is now. Like 3 weeks ago, and I've been very positive. I was even kind of referring to everything. Hey, post pandemic, here's where we are. I
Mhm.
was already kind of factoring in. Yeah, we're still going to have, COVID related stuff for the probably next few years. But I figured like the hard part was over, and we deal with it just like we deal with other things. Now
Mhm.
with this new Delta variant, it's a wild card. We're dealt this wild card. And what I mean by a wild card is this. Now, I don't know. It could be really bad. Then we could get strain after strain. It
Mhm.
could just dissipate. But because of the fear of it, the unknown, it's going to make it harder for the job search, because what's going to happen, I think, is that companies, we're seeing it now, Apple, Facebook, Twitter, Google,
Mhm.
Microsoft are all pushing back when they were going to start. They were saying, all right, we're going to go September, which makes sense. Kids go back to
Mhm.
school, September. Now it's October. Now it's like, hey, we're monitoring the situation. I was writing about today with JP Morgan is that they're starting to rethink, and JP Morgan, along with the Wall Street banks, have been very, strict and saying we want people back in the office,
Hmm.
butts and chairs, get in here. Now you don't know. They may not have a choice. They may have to say go back home. So it's
Hmm.
hard. So the search all of a sudden it's up in the air a little bit. It's
Yeah.
not as certain as it was, at least what I thought it was 3 weeks ago.
Yeah, I imagine that things won't ever be the same within a year's time. I put a couple of years because people. I think we're going to stage where people are fed up more, and they've been fed up with employers kind of not knowing where they're going from one
Yeah.
moment to the next. So they're fed up and they're tired of being misdirected. I mean, really, the old school. I mean, we got to consider the source where some of this sometimes, because you mentioned one name and it tends to, I think, of all the other things that they have fumbled, uh, and underestimating their workers and how they've treated the employees. I'm not saying they were terrible. I'm just saying there are times when they say, well, it's going to be this way, and then it's like, well, I don't know. And really, when you got other companies that said it's going to be this way for the next year, like we saw Microsoft, we saw Google say, and Twitter saying this is the way it's going to be either for the next 2 years, this is the way it's going to be for the next while. And the one who's the most agile is going to win the day and win the talent, right?
I think that's what's going to really boil down to. And that makes it tougher for the companies,
Sure it is.
because they're going to have to figure out, okay, let's say right now, New York City, for let's say the banks in New York City, now you have Cuomo and the governor Andrew Cuomo and Mayor Bill De Blasio
Hmm.
basically saying, "Hey, if you will go to restaurants, you have to show proof of having your vaccines. You have to wear masks." So that alone makes people question: Do I want to go into the city? Maybe I don't want to go into the city. Do I want to go back to work if I have
Hmm.
to work? Because it doesn't sound very nice and fun, and it just sounds very awful. And then the companies have to make a decision. They may have to say, hey, we wanted people to come back to the office, but we're going to get a revolt on our hands. So
Right.
that maybe we have to say go back, back home, and if someone wants to come in, they could come in. So and then it may change again. It may turn out that it fizzles out, and then they might bring everyone in. So it's going to be this weird vibe. And what troubles me, Mark, is I think it's going to hurt people in the job search, because when there's uncertainty, companies tend not to hire. They tend to
Hmm.
kick it down the road. They tend to hold off. They tend to kind of say, let's interview, but let's interview some more because there's
They
not a
tend to
rush.
hold on to tradition.
Yeah.
This is the way we do it. This is the
Yeah.
way we've done it in the past, and this is the way we're going to do it now. And there's a fire in the building.
Yeah.
So, you know, uh, the one again, you've got to prove to a job seeker or to the candidate and to your employees that you can be agile and it not. And you not, or the employees not be the ones to blame for it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's going to be on both sides,
Yeah.
because then, people who are looking for a job or workers also have to figure out, what do I do? Do I suck it up and go into Manhattan and worry about maybe catching something because I have to do my job and I don't want to get fired? Do you say I'm just going to quit with the great resignation? Do you just bide your time? So, from the employee, job seeker, you have to kind of keep monitoring the situation. And I think the company's
Mhm.
going to have to keep monitoring the situation,
Mhm.
which doesn't make it easy, because a lot of people, let's say a lot of people may just opt out and say, I'm just going to hang tight, just like they did during the pandemic. Let me
Sure.
just wait it out. But then, and this is why it gets so weird, because then it could be good for other job seekers.
Mhm.
Because then, as a lot of people pull out, if there are these hard to fill jobs and there are less people and you're in the market, you have a better shot of getting it. So yeah, I think, as you're saying, the watchwords are going to be just being real nimble, right? Being real nimble and
Yeah.
keep adjusting to how things are playing out.
Yeah. So your take of the possibility of September and October, there might be another mass exodus because the way that the companies are anticipating what may happen with the Delta variant and all these other factors that might be coming in.
See, I think it's going to depend on it. So let's say, we go to the end of August and there's still concerns about the Delta virus. You have mask mandates across the country and so on.
Hmm.
It's not going to be easy for people to quit their jobs because they're going to be worried, if I quit my job, am I going to find another one?
Right.
So you might not see that same great resignation.
Hmm.
Alternatively, if companies are forcing you to go back to where you are, it could be whether an investment bank or it could be a restaurant or bar. Certain people may say, you know what, I'm just gonna, I'm gonna quit because my health is more important than what I'm making as a waiter or waitress.
Are companies losing focus by mandating a hybrid workplace? What?
I think you have to, because think about it. Let's say you and I are responsible for a hybrid, and you talk
Hmm.
about companies with tens of thousands of people. There's so much to do.
Sure.
So we all set it up for a hybrid. Now we don't know. So now we got to set it up for maybe a remote, but then we got to be prepared to come back. So I imagine we put so much time and effort into that
Hmm.
that we don't have enough time to look at new candidates who are interviewing.
Right.
So
Right.
that's where I see things getting bottlenecked for a
Yeah.
while.
Companies going to have to fight tooth and nail pretty much to have it their way, or will they actually get some kind of emotional intelligence as a whole and start to say, hey, we got to put these in plans if A, because very rare I hear people, if companies say, if A can't happen, then we'll do B, then we'll do C. I rarely see that. I don't know if you see anything different.
See, to me, right now, it's a little bit different in the sense that a year ago, it was clean.
Hmm.
We're in a pandemic. This is really bad. We're not going to bring people in because of the obvious
Hmm.
reasons.
Yeah.
Now it's, you know, people like, well, is it really that bad? Is it not that bad? Could it get worse? So there's so much now. I think there's more uncertainty. Like during the pandemic, ironically, there was more certainty. Yeah, this is bad. You know, this is really problematic.
Yeah.
Right now, it's more of what do we do?
So much uncertainty, but I think to a certain degree, you have to provide some people some comfort in knowing that you can either switch, or better yet, that you are going to see the future, because that's pretty much what most companies pride themselves on, whether they're small or big. They're saying this is the direction we're going because we see it this way. And a lot of companies are building, you know or pretty much setting themselves up, or causing people to doubt, because there more uncertainty amongst those who are making the decisions than there are people, because people have already made the decision. If this happens, I'm going to be staying home, or if this happens, I'm going to go into the workplace no matter what, which might be fewer than the people who will actually stay home if they know that there's danger approaching.
I like what you said about management, and I think that is going to be the defining characteristic of a company. Can
Hmm.
they really articulate to their workforce what's happening in a very empathetic, compassionate, and intelligent way?
Yeah.
Not demanding, not being stern, but really just talking to people like they're human beings
Hmm.
and sharing. And I would love it if some of these companies would just really be upfront about it and say, hey, listen, we're not sure what to do, you know?
And
And
that means a whole lot
yeah,
more. That kind of candor means a whole
yeah.
lot more to somebody who is looking on and maybe considering working for them, than to say that we're going to forge forward with this from now on without considering all the other intangibles that could actually happen.
Yeah, I think it'd be better if they kind of lay it out and say, hey, we love to say we have a crystal ball and this is what's happening, but this is kind of, moving quickly and there's not enough, intelligence right now to know what we can do a year from now. So we're going to all have to work together to
Yeah.
be, as you said, to be flexible, adjust, be nimble,
Hmm.
and just again to be really honest with folks and say this might not be easy for a lot of people because it may disrupt it. We may say, "Hey, be at home," but then things change. We may ask you to come back.
Right.
It depends on how it plays out. So this it's going to be. I think it's going to be an odd time. And this is all if this Delta keeps going in other strains. If it fizzles out, then it's a little different because then maybe there's more clarity of what to do. So what I'm saying now is just based right here in this moment where, let's take New York as an example where you could see they're putting in some really strict stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And, and when you do that, it makes everybody else, other cities and states saying, maybe we should do the same thing. And then before you know it, that's the trend.
Yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly. Something you said recently on a thread on LinkedIn,
Mhm.
you said an energized team will vastly improve results at the company, creating a better atmosphere for both executives and workers. And I know we're kind
Wow,
of
that sounds
changing.
good.
Yeah, I know it
That sounds
sounds
awesome.
excellent, but but it brings to
Yeah.
mind one, what an energized team is going to look like here in 2021, and with all that's going on.
That's a good question. It's probably gonna be hard because after, I would suggest that a vast amount of people felt like, okay, we're pretty much almost done. Whew. And now all of a sudden you get hit again.
Hmm.
And it's very hard to be energized. We're like, now you're worried. Okay, are we going to be under lockdown again? What's going to happen with my kids' school? Let's say you have young kids. Does this mean that they're not going to be in school? If they're not being in school, am I going to have to quit to take care of them again? So yeah, it just throws a big monkey wrench into all the decision making from people.
Yeah.
And and then it's hard if that happens to show up to work and be your best self and be all excited when it's like, I got to worry about my kids and they're wearing masks 8 hours a day, or I got to worry about, they're going to their job and maybe something could happen to them, or maybe something to me or my partner or my spouse.
Hmm.
So when you have all those things hanging over your head, it's tough, to come in like, yes, let's get working today. I can't wait to work on my Excel spreadsheet,
Yeah.
because it seems kind of meaningless
Yeah.
in the face of
Well,
everything else.
I think people who are working from home, or at least working remotely somewhat, it could possibly have a domino effect, that if
Hmm.
so and so is affected with their children, hey, what about me
Yeah.
and my kids? And it could possibly affect the whole team. And I think that a team can still remain energized if they all understand each other's challenges a whole lot more than the company, because you are the company now when you're working in teams, right?
Yeah, the more I'm thinking about it, I go back to what you said, Mark. I think it really is going to boil down to, the senior level management, because the tone comes from the top, so that if they are clear in their message, if they're looking after people, if they're
Hmm.
giving surveys to their employees, hey, what do you think? What do you want? What would work well for you? Do you want staggered hours? Do you want to stay at home? Do you want a hybrid? Let's and the ones who reach out and keep those communications open, then I think you could get them energized because now you're feeling like we're all on a mission together. Then you're feeling, hey, I feel empowered because they're trusting me. They're asking my opinion. They want to
Hmm.
know what I want to do, and then they're going to allow me to do the way I want to do. Then maybe you could see it because then the same way where a lot of people during the pandemic were putting in way more hours. They're
Yeah.
working longer hours. They're working nights. They're working weekends, and partly because there was not much else to do, but they felt a sense of accomplishment, like, okay, at least I'm doing something productive. So I think if the tone at the top is like saying, hey, let's work together, let's make this happen, it
Hmm.
could energize people and you could achieve great things. If management just takes this hands off approach and everybody is looking around like, what do we do? Like, what are
Hmm.
we supposed to do? That's going to be the worst. And I think you'll see a divide between companies. The ones that have good leadership, they'll probably do really well and prevail. The ones who have really lackluster or don't put the effort into it. There's this, I don't think we talked about it. There was a survey. This is really surprising from SHRM, right?
Hmm.
And they polled both remote workers and supervisors. And the supervisor said basically, and I'm not making this up because it sounds so crazy,
Hmm.
that we sometimes forget about the remote workers and that remote workers are easily replaceable. And this is what what they responded. This is how they feel. So imagine how the workers feel if
Right.
that's what they're saying. Because if that's what they're saying, imagine what they're doing or not doing.
Well, with the workplace, I mean, being remote, it takes away the emotional attachment
Yes,
to the employee.
that's a good
So,
point. That's interesting. Yeah,
so,
yeah. Would you mean
so
like you don't
therefore,
see them, so you might be a little bit more
out
cold
of
and
sight,
callous.
out of mind
Yeah,
is,
yeah,
is what's coming down to it.
yeah, yeah.
Unless you are constantly communicating
Yeah.
with your team, it could definitely feel like, well, I don't have this emotional attachment. I don't see them all the time. I don't comment on their lunch. They can't get, I don't, there's no exchange in office dynamic that you're used to. So in that way, some people would say, well, that was like family, but remote no longer has that family except the one that they live with.
Yeah.
So it totally changes the connection between the employer, the supervisor, and the employee, the subordinate, to the point to where now I can see where they don't have that emotional attachment, or they're not as sentimental to their employee that they once were.
I really like that. It's such a smart viewpoint. Is that if a manager isn't trained and they're not great at what they do and they're thrown into it and their heart's not into it, yeah, you're not going to know who Mark and Jack are. You're in
Right.
Chicago, I'm in New Jersey, they're maybe, in LA, and they don't really know us. They're not taking the time to know us. So of course they're going to feel we're dispensable and that they'll forget about us. And you and I probably spend all day long looking for new jobs
Yep.
because of that. So
Right. Right.
so they're cutting off their nose to spite their face.
Right.
Um,
Right. I was just talking to my friend Scott Beeson about his book about bringing the whole person to work, kind of ideal. There's an irony to it. As you bring your whole person to work, the less of a whole person you'll possibly be seen, because the physicality, so used to the relationship being built on what, whether somebody's right in front of us or not, is going to make a big difference in how they're going to be seen. I've collaborated with people at least hundreds of times now, over the past 11 years or so. There's not much of a difference when you meet somebody in person after being online. Like you and I met in New Jersey or in New York. We were going to have lunch. I wouldn't expect anything different. But if you're not used to it, you have perception, you have things that come into play to where that dynamic may not be as amicable as you would, as if you were working across from each
mhm.
other at the office.
It's a gap that needs to close. And in that same survey, it was saying that the remote workers kind of felt that they're missing out on the interactions, they're missing out on networking, meeting new people.
Mhm.
And so they were kind of saying they were recognizing that it's a trade-off. They have a better quality of life and a balance, but they realize their career might be hurting a little bit because the managers aren't paying as much attention. They're not networking. The big bosses don't see them. So they
Mhm.
kind of realize it's they prefer working remote, but it's not perfect because they feel like you said, out of sight, out of mind.
It could be a little tough for people to
Yeah,
really to make that adjustment and to tell the difference
yeah,
between virtual and real life. Well, really, there isn't much of a difference. I mean, it's just that you're there and I'm here and we're having this conversation. It wouldn't be any different if we were together. I mean,
yeah,
or physical in the room. There really isn't much of a difference, but the mindset is the biggest difference of it all.
yeah. It's definitely it's so frustrating because to me, it seemed like we were going to such a good place. It seemed like, okay, we pretty much closed the door in the pandemic, not, completely, but enough that we could kind of live our lives.
Hmm.
And then all of a sudden you hear this new thing and you're like, all right, what does that mean? But then it also raises the specter. Well, after Delta, is there going to be, I don't know, Epsilon and so on, so on, so on?
Right.
It's like, oh my God, we're like, how, who's going to be the one to say, you know what, stop it. We just go back to our lives and that's it. Or maybe you can't. And that's where I think you get that challenge where I'm concerned that the job market could get clunky because with uncertainty, it's easy for people just to say, I'm going to stay put where I am, or I'm just going to collect unemployment and ride it
Mhm.
out. And companies will say, hey, let's just wait, let's see what happens, let's wait some more, wait some more.
Yeah.
And that doesn't bode well.
Doesn't. And one of the other shifts I think we'll see as far as job seekers concerned and their job search, and I'll have to say this knowing that we've said it before, but it's no longer about the company as an entity anymore and looking at where you want to work. You got to also look at the team and the people who you're going to be interacting with. It's sort of like we talked about last hour,
Yeah.
where you know who your boss will matter, who your teammates will matter, and that's where you'll need to try to get the insight and also get the intel on what it's like to work with them remote on a team when everybody else is not looking.
I like that. You know what? That seems to be like hitting the nail on the head, because if you are looking for a new job in this kind of market, it definitely behooves you to find out who your boss is, and maybe when you're interviewing, to really ask what's their style, like what are you doing for remote workers?
Hmm.
First of all, let's say, can I work remote? And if I can, what systems do you have in place? What
Hmm.
what policies, what procedures, what controls, what tools? And this is not a time to be shy about it, because if you don't get good answers, then you probably don't want to work there, because if you get a sense that they didn't think it through,
Right.
then what do you think is going to happen? They're not going to care too much. But the ones who thought it through care. The ones who say, okay, here's what we do. We have a Slack channel. We use Google Hangouts throughout the day. We
Hmm.
do, Zoom calls every blah at this time. We have regular check-ins with the manager. We have, tech teams available. So let's say if you're having trouble with your computer, with what have you, you call
Hmm.
this number, they'll deal there. Then you're like, wow, okay,
Yeah.
they
Yeah.
they really care.
Yeah.
So yeah,
And then you want to meet the team
yeah,
you want to meet with them as a team, I think, because
that's
that
interesting. Yeah,
gives you the window to the team dynamic. If you meet with them as an individual, then you're just going to, okay, you get familiar with someone, they ask you questions
hmm,
to see how you are, but what you're interested in is how do they respond as a team? What is the philosophy? And then you're able to look at the reactions of each person as the other person talks. That gives you a heart, because if they're not cohesive as a team, you will see heads turn in different ways, eyes roll in different ways, and also maybe times when they're correcting each other to the point to where it becomes not to correct to give the right information, but correct them to because they don't necessarily like their perspective, and that just adds to the fact that you've got to do that kind of dig deeping, because it's important to you that that team vibe feels right, because you're going to be spending quite a bit of your day with them.
I like that a lot, and that's something maybe else you also ask. If let's say you're interviewing, hey, is it okay if I sit down with this group and get a sense of everything you mentioned, but
Hmm.
then also feel, if I'm working remote by myself, hey, now I know these people. So I have my core group that I can go to and brainstorm with and not feel so alone, and then just feel part of something. So that's
Right.
that's a good thing to ask. So to ask the nuts and bolts of what they're doing for somebody who's going to be remote, but then also to see, hey, who are my peers? Can I really get to know them so I can make sure I'm not on an island by myself?
Right.
And that
Right.
goes to your initial question about how you can get people together and be enthused about it. Because now you're like,
Mhm.
hey, I got my team, I got my posse, I got my group, I got my tribe, whatever you want to call it, and say, hey, this is
Right.
awesome. All right, I
Right.
feel good. I might
Right.
be sitting by myself, but you know what? I know I could just hit the Zoom call, and Mark's going to be on there, and that guy Scott will be on there, you know, and Kyle and so forth.
And just people will have to be a whole lot more thoughtful
Mhm.
for them to leverage the opportunities they're going to get interviewing. I know we could talk more about it,
Okay.
but
All right.
I've got another guest waiting.
All right. Who do we have
So
next? Who's
yeah,
online? Who's
I'll
up
hit
for
you
that?
up so everybody knows Jack Kelly, founder
Yeah.
of
Thanks.
WeeklySpeaker.io. Check out his Forbes column. You see content 3, 4, 5 times a week. You'll love it. And also catch his Future of Work live stream that is every day now.
Trying to do that. Maybe, take it off Fridays.
They're taking off like
I mean,